Greetings, YouTube. I'm going to continue with my alternative DC trio concept where we have Clark Kent, Diana, and Dr. Bruce Wayne as alternatives of the traditional versions in the DC universe, these set in the 19th century. And the last video left off at 1855 at the dawn of the Civil War, which is occurring earlier in my alternative reality. Now, a friend of mine made a comment about the mythos driving Clark Kent insane. What would an insane Clark Kent be like? And I'm going to be very forward with this. My goal here is to have Earth become free of the mythos, at least free from the threat of being destroyed by the mythos. I don't think they would ever be truly free. There would always be cultists popping up and people seeking power on their own. But my explicit goal is at the end of this story arc, Earth will be free of threat of destruction by the Cthulhu mythos. And part of this is because I'm trying to create a positive universe. Not necessarily all puppies and sunshine, but where there is less suffering by and large. It's going to be a very utilitarian, pragmatic structure, political structure. And in fact, it's going to be moving in a direction that may make some people unhappy, but that's okay. This is the structure I want to create. It's deliberate, both to make it an interesting setting and allowing the player characters to decide which side of this structure they are going to be on. And the actions of the trio, specifically Clark Kent and Diana, is one of the things that's pushed up the Civil War. The South is feeling decidedly threatened by these two people who keep freeing slaves and helping them move to the West out of the slave regions of America. And because the North is becoming more and more post-scarcity because of the Kryptonian technology that is being adapted to our world by the genius Dr. Bruce Wayne and his assistants and his cohorts, all of whom could go one way or the other as far as good guy, bad guy, depending on how you want to use them. The South is feeling really threatened. I mean, their slave economy is really dependent on certain political and economic structures remaining in place. And as these political and economic structures are just being poleaxed, they're terrified. If we don't separate ourselves now, we will be overwhelmed by these forces through pure economic means, and then we will no longer be in power because the slave institution will become superfluous, and then we'll have to change, and we don't want to change because we are deeply socially conservative. It has always been this way. It should always be this way, even if that means holding a whole lot of humans in chattel slavery. Because let's face it, if the Southerners really thought that was a negative, they wouldn't have owned slaves, nor would they have created the social institutions of pitting the slaves against poor whites to create the black-white conflict that helped get poor whites to defend the institution of slavery, even though it did not directly benefit them. Well, I may be a poor white dude, but at least I'm not a slave. At least I'm not black. So that artificial conflict, it helped prop up the slave structure in the South. You see the same thing in Cuba and in other areas that were at one time controlled by different peoples, where they would pit light-skinned and dark-skinned peoples against each other to create an internal conflict which kept them fighting with each other and not paying attention to the people in charge, who were their actual joint enemies. And it still works in America today. Keep the people squabbling amongst each other, and the people in power can do what they want. So we have this conflict happening, and Clark and Diana are seeing this as an opportunity. So they arrive at the White House. literally dropping out of the sky. Now, they've had contact with the U.S. government in the past because the U.S. government has recognized that they exist. They know that these people are powerful. And a number of people in Congress and the other portions of the U.S. government are both afraid of these people and trying to figure out how we can best utilize them. How can we take advantage of them? Because politicians are politicians. And they present themselves to the president and to Congress, and they give them a deal. The South has attacked your forces and killed U.S. Union soldiers. Give us, just the two of us, 6 months. In the meantime, you can be building up your forces and preparing for war. And if we have not helped turn the tide in the Union's favor, we walk. We will get out of the conflict. We will no longer cause any more issues for you politically. But if we help you take on the Confederates, we want a deal out of that. And that deal is equality. Everybody gets a vote. Everyone is free. Congress and the president debate it. They figure these people can't pull this off, but we know they're powerful. They could very well keep the Confederates busy while we're getting our forces together, and they could do them some harm. And if they can weaken the Confederates, well, more's the better for the Union. And if they die in the process, win-win politically for the Union. Some of the Confederates are gone. These people who are maybe a direct or an existential threat have been eliminated. So they can't see a downside to this because, being politicians, they can't really see beyond the end of their noses. They're thinking maybe next election cycle. So the president and Congress say, okay, go for it. Take on the Confederates. Let's show us what you can do. So Clark and Diana say, you got it. And they take off. 3 months later, there is no Confederate military. It is flat out gone. Clark and Diana didn't pull punches. If they encountered a rebel under arms, they died. There was no threats. There was no statements of intent. They just killed them. And very shortly, the Confederates figured out if you had arms on you, if you were holding a weapon and these two showed up, you were dead. And they could show up anywhere. There was no way to defend themselves from Clark and Diana. Diana makes Captain America look like a toddler. She's almost as powerful as Clark, knows more about combat than anyone else alive on the planet other than the other fellow Amazons who are somewhat excluded at the moment from this whole process. And the Confederates don't have any aerial power, now do they? Their navy was gone in the first day for what it was. There is never going to be any ironclads. And after 3 months of this, the Confederates just surrender completely. The government just collapses. The Union forces roll in and just take over, and the Union forces don't fire a shot. Now, the Union government, they're all excited about that. And then it comes time to pay the bill, where they actually have to pass the law or laws that create complete freedom and equality for everyone in the United States of America. And Bruce Wayne wrote the amendments. And what was not noticed in those amendments, it may take more than one, I'm not really sure how you do that, is that when it came to equality, it specified that marriage was between 2 consenting adults. No 1 man, 1 woman. And no one in the 19th century really caught that. It didn't occur to any of them. It occurred to Diana, though, now, didn't it? Because she comes from a place where all the marriages are same-sex marriages. So in one fell swoop, the United States of America becomes more progressive in 1856 or 57, by the time this all gets sorted out, than it was in the 21st century, at least till quite recently. And still, there are many places in America where it is not still accepted and it's being fought. And for example, we still don't have any trans rights, and gay people still don't have as many rights as straight people and cisgender people do. So suddenly, America is a far more progressive environment. Slaves are all free, many of them up and leave, and Bruce Wayne's post-scarcity technology begins to spread even further. So by 1860, and again, I'm jumping ahead so you can get more adventures in there with them mopping up any resistance to these changes, because there's going to be, with them taking on the mythos, again, hammering it down further and further. Because in my view, the mythos would ignore us if it wasn't for humans drawing their attention to us. And it is humans' discovery that they can tap into the power of the mythos that has drawn the mythos here. Essentially, all the cultists chummed the water. And if they hadn't done that, all the sharks would have just gone about their business and ignored us. Because as far as the mythos is concerned, we are paramecium. Right now, you have more non-human cells in your body than human cells. And you may not have known that. And if you didn't know it, and I hadn't told you, and no one else had ever told you, you would have gone throughout the rest of your life being completely oblivious to this fact, because it has zero effect on your everyday life. Unless something goes wrong with one of those life forms inside you, you will never have to concern yourself with it. And that's pretty much how the mythos treats us. Unless we draw their attention, we just don't matter. Now, that existential dread terrified Lovecraft. He was also a virulent racist, and he rolled that into the mythos, that existential dread of the unknown, of the foreign, of the taint, of the corruption, was the Italian plumber down the street. He was not a complex man in that regard. Let's face it, he was nocturnal and ate nothing but ice cream. He was not a well-being. So in that time period between the end of the Civil War and the freeing of Americans, so they're now all Americans, all accepted, in 1860, Bruce begins to spread that even further, the technology. The base in orbit is nearing completion, and they are debating whether they're going to create more of these things or maybe trade ships so they can start exploring more of the area. The problem is that with rare exception, there's only like 3 people that get up onto that space station. They don't what you have called crews. So if they want to build these ships, they're going to need people to pilot them, to explore, and they don't really trust anyone at this point. So they're trying to figure out, how are we going to create a cadre of people that we can trust, that we're not going to have to worry about, turning on us, using our technology against us. And it is around this time that Bruce and Diana, rather Clark and Diana, have come to the conclusion that their success in America was messy and complicated and took way too long. To get everything hammered out is probably going to take them till they get to like 1865 or maybe 1870. And they can finally say, okay, America's now on the track that we want them to be on. They're in a post-scarcity society. There's equality and freedom everywhere, or as close as they can get. But that took a long time. And they don't want to have to do that nation by nation by nation by nation. It's just going to take too long. And it is that piecemeal nature that made Krypton fall. Because in my Krypton, they weren't one cohesive culture. They were like us. They were different nations. So they may be really successful at the moment of taking on the mythos in America. And maybe they've had some success in all other places. But they know that they're going to be playing whack-a-mole if they keep doing it this way. And they don't want to be taken 10 or 15 years in each country. So they make a radical decision. They decided the best way to do this is simply to take over. Just become the Empress and Emperor of Terra. And they speak to Bruce. Bruce listens to them and realizes that this is a radical decision, but it is the most pragmatic and utilitarian solution to the problem at hand. It would help free every human being on the planet. It would help spread their technology even further. It would help avoid conflicts. And it would mean that the mythos would have fewer and fewer places to hide and make their eventual goal achievable within a reasonable span of time. Instead of taking centuries, it may take some decades. And that's something that, if they can pull this off within 20 years, that would be a victory. Even though Bruce is, at this point, he's probably in his 70s. Like, if it's 65, 70, remember, he was born in 1799, so he'd be 71 in 1870. And the rights that they have granted are being given to the Native Americans as they move west. So there isn't the displacement that we see in our time. There's not going to be a trail of tears. There's not necessarily going to be no conflict, but those conflicts are not going to be extinction, extermination, genocide. There will continue to be conflicts as settlers move to the west, but you're going to still end up with a far more integrated country where the indigenous peoples have far more say in what's going on and retain far more of their land. So you're going to look at a more of a melting pot than we have now. You're not going to see reservations. It is going to mean that there isn't going to be the land grabs, there isn't going to be the great pushes like there were in our timeline. But also remember, there isn't going to be as much population pressure either, because thanks to Bruce and the Kryptonian medical technology, humans have complete control over birth rates now. Disease is being eliminated. People are going to live longer. They're going to have age ranges like us. That's not what they had in the 19th century. So as this happens, as time progresses, and they make this decision, bingo, we're going to take over, they create a modified world, they expand on the amendments, the Constitution they helped modify for America to create a Terran Constitution. Very progressive, but also very ironclad. And they just present this to a country. So this is the Constitution you're going to adopt. If you adopt this, you abide by it, everything else you do inside your country that is not covered by this, we don't care. As long as all of these rights, civil rights and human rights, civil liberties and human rights are abided by, everything else you do is your own business. You'll have, you'll elect people to a world Terran parliament, so you'll have a voice in the planetary government, and that's how you will speak to the empire itself. And the First Nation says, nah, we're not really interested. So Clark and Diana do exactly the same thing they did against the Confederates. they just kill a bunch of people. And after killing the top 10 or 12 leaders of that nation, you can pick whatever nation it was you want to, probably one of the more despotic, smaller nations, they ask the next leader, here's the Constitution. Would you like to adopt it? Rinse and repeat until someone says yes. And once they have that established, they officially declare the creation of the Terran Empire with Empress Diana and Emperor Kal-El. He adopts his Kryptonian name as his imperial title. And henceforth, Clark Kent is no more, and Kal-El steps into the fore. Now, it doesn't take a lot for everyone to realize that something big is happening. And once they've got the first nation, they go to the next one, and the next one, until they have a dozen or so nations under their control, and they begin to build the parliament, which they discussed, which they actually do listen to. It's very much a constitutional monarchy, though the emperor and empress are gods. So they may take advice from the parliament, but the parliament knows that they cannot impose controls upon the emperor and empress. That just isn't going to happen. To help them pull this off on a global scale, Diana goes home and says, hey, this is what we're going to do to help free everyone and give women equality. Would any of you Amazons like to help us? After some debate, half the Amazons say, yeah, we will. So they leave their island and enter our world. And they are a major shock to the world at large, because they'd kind of gotten used to the idea that there's this one woman, Empress Diana, who was powerful and strong and was this, near godlike figure. And then all of a sudden, there are hundreds of Captain America's 6-foot Amazons, that can bench press cars, who are very independent, self-assured, and take no crap from anyone. And they begin to become the officer corps of the Empire. But if you're going to have an officer corps, you need troops. And that's where Bruce comes in. Because all the while, he's still been plucking away Kryptonian technology, piecing it apart, figuring out what they did wrong, what he can do right, how he can adapt it to our world. And one of the things he's come across that he thinks could be really helpful that the Kryptonians never used, because they, like the Star Trek Federation, were terrified of automation, is that Bruce comes up with robots. He creates a droid army. Can anyone think of what direction I'm going in? We have an empire with a droid army. And no, neither Diana nor Kal-El is wearing a big black helmet.